So ladies and gentlemen, with the DCU, I think we can all agree that all while James Gunn is aspiring to refresh the comic book space on film with an approach that focuses on storytelling, characters, and emotion, there of course may be one thing that will surely remain consistent. And that is introducing a big bad of some description to the overarching story that the DCU will tackle. Now, this is a video I've been wanting to make for quite a while now, and that is, of course, diving into the possible candidates or like the potential big bads that could be in James Gunn's new DCU. So, as we know, there is 2 chapters across the entirety of the 8 to 10 year plan of the DCU as it stands right now. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because I think there can easily be an argument made for how the DCU, for all we know, might not have the typical overarching big bad across both chapters. So with the villains in this list, all I'm saying before we dive into it is bear in mind the idea of not only the possibility of them being an overarching big bad, but also the potential of more persistent appearances from villains, perhaps per chapter or multiple per chapter. And if you couldn't tell already, this video is going to be a little bit of a long one. I mean, you know how we do it here on the channel, but honestly, I want to go over multiple big bads, how they could be used, and get into quite a bit of detail there, so strap yourselves in. So number one, I'm going to start off with an easy one that I think everyone has heard. By the way, this is in no particular order. Number one, the Center. So the Center has been rumored heavily to play a role in the DCU, which is what led to quite a lot of fans to just entertain the idea of the Center perhaps being the first somewhat big bad. Now, I've seen mixed opinions on this. Some people know who the Center is and most certainly find it a threat that could be pretty formidable, and it certainly fits in with the bizarre, big kaiju-esque villains that James Gunn has gone for in the past of his movies. So a sentient island that has been observing humanity for millennia to the point of now wanting to destroy it because of the threat that humanity now poses to the Earth. It does seem like a story with influences from Justice League: The New Frontier, of course, that could be an actual thing I could see being adapted. I think it could be pretty cool. But the thing is, on the other side, you have some people, as with all things, different strokes for different folks, of course. We're not all going to be sharing the same opinion all the time. We have different preferences for villains. They don't always dig the idea of the first DCU threat being a sentient island that can summon literal spawn dinosaurs for an army. I mean, that's why it's also called Dinosaur Island, of course. It can send out huge energy blasts. It can slap you with some freaking tentacles. So, you know, that might not be something people are really interested in compared to some of the other contenders that we have on this list. Now, for me personally, I wouldn't say no. I do think it would be a very, very unique threat for the characters to face from the standpoint of, oh, it's not just like one big bad individual, so to speak. I like how it is straight from the comics. I mean, not to say that the other villains aren't, but like this is something that could be just really outside the norm of, as I said, an individual, but also something that is, you know, versatile in all of the threat that it can pose, because again, it's a literal sentient island. One thing I want to say as well for each villain that we're going to go through is where I could see this particular big bad for the DCU fitting in either chapter 1 or chapter 2. So I think the Center would be more of a chapter 1 big bad than that of a chapter 2 for me, because I think it would be a good looming threat in the background to cook up in the first couple of years as, you know, maybe there's signs of change around the Earth, which would likely first get addressed in Creature Commandos because rumors suggest that they could very well be on Dinosaur Island in that series we're getting later this year. You have to admit it would quite literally rally heroes and bring them together in a world where, of course, heroes have worked together before. And we know that Batman has been around for likely 10 to 12 years at this point, as we know that he has a Bat family built up around him to some extent. Heavy emphasis on the latter part there. But since we know Superman isn't a veteran, and yet neither this origin story in the DCU, we could be seeing him work with some other popular heroes for the first time, or just, you know, establishing a collaboration that's not really been done before, even between that of the members of the Trinity, perhaps. We know that he'll be working with Mr. Terrific, Hawkgirl, Guy Gardner, Metamorpho, and Superman Legacy, but the threat of the Center may demand a team-up that has never really been seen before in this iteration of the DC Universe. Okay, so for number 2 on this list, before we get into, I guess, more of the widely known potential big bads for the DCU. Number 2 for me is Magog. Now, you may know who he is from Kingdom Come, and this is why I wanted to start with this character towards the beginning of this video at least, because one thing we've had a lot of with the DCU ramp-up so far is James Gunn teasing Kingdom Come ever since he came in as head of DC Studios, suggesting that maybe there might be a few influences of that Kingdom Come storyline in his new DCU, and it's made me think of what those could exactly be and how that could even maybe build up to a potential DCU Big Bad if I was to try and maybe draw some kind of influence from that. Well, the immediate thing I can take out of that, with maybe combining it with some of the other teasers that we've got, and how there may be a slight reverse Kingdom Come situation, storyline, if you will. What I mean by that, and I know some of you have heard me say this a bunch of times before, but I'm going to say it one more time just so I can pave the way to Magog in this video as a potential big bad. This would obviously mean, when I say reverse, that Superman isn't as old as he is in the Kingdom Come storyline, but instead, as we know with Corenswet's Superman, he's going to be this fully fledged reporter matching David Corenswet's age. Now, we know that this is a world, as I've already been over in this video, in where heroes exist and have existed for a long time already, including metahumans, villains, you name it. And given that Superman in Superman Legacy isn't where he's at in the Kingdom Come storyline, the reverse Kingdom Come story comes into play. There could be a whole new generation of wannabe heroes and vigilantes out there causing just way more harm than good. It's just so, not regulated. I'm not saying this applies to every single last hero. Hawkgirl may be doing a good job, Mr. Terrific, but there's just so many. Again, the key thing when James Gunn says heroes exist and have existed, this is where we could already be in a bit of an overrun world. Not quite to the lengths of Kingdom Come in the pages of that comic book where it's just insane. They think they're doing right, but their overall approach to handling crime is just overall so messy and just not the way remotely that the Justice League would handle things. So I think that they can mirror that on some level. So the actual Kingdom Come storyline and where the Justice League return to set an example again for the way things should be done in the pages of that story. In the DCU, what they can do here is that David Corenswet's Clark as Superman could set that example for the very first time, or at least the first time since, let's just say, the Justice Society back in the World War II days. Or maybe that lasted for decades and decades into the 2000s, but maybe in the past decade and a half, 2 decades, things have kind of got a bit out of control, which is why Superman's setting this new precedent of justice. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this with regards to Magog, because Magog is, as we've somewhat gone over, a bit of an anti-hero in a sense. In Kingdom Come, he ended up killing the Joker, and this all relates to the very politically interesting aspects of the story, because when Magog was put on trial, he was actually let go after massive support from the public, who were kind of okay with him murdering the Joker. And that is because, and this is kind of a bit of a meta thing at the same time, you get a lot of people being like, why doesn't Batman just kill the Joker if he's just going to escape, kill bunches and bunches of people? Isn't that on Batman kind of thing? Let's just say that there's a lot of people who just didn't mind Magog doing that. They'd rather be rid of the supervillain threat and taken out of the picture entirely rather than just letting them return again and again to cause way more harm. But as we know, with a lot of heroes out there, especially Superman, that is just not the way he does things or would stand for things. So what I like about this, and can see them potentially drawing heavy influence from with Kingdom Come and putting it into the DCU, is imagining David Corenswet's Superman in this reverse Kingdom Come situation, is that he's just trying to do things better in a climate in where there's all kinds of popular heroes, of course, but also wannabe vigilantes to heroes to anti-heroes, and there's a political somewhat undertone to the ethics of how situations should be handled with villains out there. And maybe there's even big support for Magog. Maybe even Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor endorses him and endorses this method of taking down threats and disagrees with Superman's perhaps more lenient approach, and maybe the way Luthor could just put that out there to citizens of the world. Maybe there's all kinds of support for both sides. So this is where also, the Authority could play into this quite well, because as we know, they're not villains, but they're not exactly the best example of doing things, as they just try and get stuff done by any means necessary as well. Again, though, I'm not saying it should be a straight up adaptation. I am not saying that Magog should kill the Joker of the DCU in the first 4 years of the DCU. I'm not saying that at all. And I don't think humanity should even reflect what it's like in Kingdom Come, and where all hope is somewhat lost and, every popular hero is completely gone and just replaced by their legacy. Keywords being influenced by Kingdom Come and, a reverse Kingdom Come situation. But I think that this is for sure a character I had to include as a potential big bad on this list, just for a world that's been used to heroes and villains for a very long time, and just given that Superman is fairly new, his influence and sense of justice in this world just hasn't truly reverberated or influenced others, and this could be the somewhat long road to how that gets established. All right, so number 3, ladies and gentlemen, on my list here is none other than Brainiac. Brainiac is, a character that people have been wanting to see for a very, very long time. But the bigger question that I have for people is just how do you want to see him? Now, since this video is obviously on big bads of the DCU, well, clearly I'm going to be presenting him as a big bad here. Now, whether you want him to be an overarching big bad for both chapters, or as I said earlier, perhaps a big bad just, per chapter, so like in 3 to 5 year bursts maybe, let me know down in the comments below. But I do see a lot of people say that they want him to just be a Superman movie villain. Now, for me, I do understand that, but personally, I feel like Brainiac has the potential for just so much more than just a one movie villain appearance. As I've lightly detailed before, perhaps a Brainiac drone is discovered, the threat is teased, and, maybe he wants to add another shrunken city to his collection. But to be one-punched in a single project, so let's just say Brainiac is the villain of Superman Legacy, I'm not saying he is, but just for example's sake, and then he just gets bested by the end of it, I don't know, it just seems almost too quick for a villain with such potential. Now, to rephrase that, I'm not saying that he can't be somewhat, one-punched in it. Not one-punched, but bested by the end of a singular movie's events and where the actual face-off happens. But I think the threat of him and even appearances should happen over that of a few projects, whether that's beforehand or maybe even possibly with that in mind, still lasting to carry on in the future in some ways. With things like maybe even the Lanterns out in space get word of Brainiac on his way after, hearing about more cities being collected for, Brainiac's hunger and, thirst for knowledge. And they're worried that Earth could be the next target. And that could be maybe teased in the Lantern show. And as I was just teasing a second ago, even after being bested, he can appear in future projects, as he often, after a seeming defeat, if you will, has his consciousness re-uploaded to some other kind of host, if you will. And, maybe it was one of Brainiac's drones in the first place that was bested and not actually Brainiac himself. Then just, going off of that idea from the top of my head here, you could have things like Lex Luthor, Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor, recover what was left of Brainiac's drone and even learn more about Superman's heritage, being a Kryptonian, and how to even take him down. Maybe Superman Legacy just sets up the disdain that Lex Luthor has for Clark, but it's not exactly, you're not going to have Lex have a knuckle duster of kryptonite there and try and punch him in the first movie. So I fully expect a nice build up there, but through an idea like what I just mentioned, it could be the way that Luthor learns more and equips himself with a way to actually take Superman down, which of course just leads into more potential for Luthor's rise. Ultimately for me, there's just honestly so much potential, and I can imagine DCU Big Bads, if they're done in smaller arcs, having potentially so much more connective tissue that leads and builds up into other things, just evolving organically. And Brainiac, without me rambling so much about Brainiac in particular, because I think everyone knows Brainiac, that can be done. Absolutely. But speaking of the Luthor stuff that I was just teasing with how he's not specifically on this list as his own Big Bad, but he kind of is in a way. So number 4 here on the list is the Legion of Doom. And instantly, below my little subheading there, I've just got, yes, please. Which should tell you a lot in how I do kind of think, I mean, I'm not saying this will happen, how could I know that? But I've got a good feeling in how I think this is one of the more organic, genuine, authentic things that could actually happen in the DCU in terms of concepts. So I know technically there was a tease for this as well at the end of Justice League in the DCEU, but really the DCEU was largely cooking up to Darkseid. So I don't feel the same way with Darkseid as I do with the Legion of Doom, and what I mean by that is, I doubt Gunn is going to do Darkseid in the DCU anytime soon when it comes to big bads, which is, by the way, why Darkseid isn't on my list. I wouldn't rule out some kind of, maybe even appearance in the latter of the DCU's 8 to 10 year plan, or like some kind of reference, but do you really think that the main big Chad of the DCU that they're cooking up to is going to be Darkseid after what they were going for before? I don't think so. So just to address that elephant in the room, if anyone's like, hey, Boba, why aren't you talking about Darkseid? But the Legion of Doom is something I could imagine for sure. So perhaps with the Legion of Doom, what side of the chapters can I imagine them appearing? I think maybe more of a chapter 2 threat, just for some obvious reasons here. Given the cook-up that is required, I think it would be way too premature to, chapter 1 that we've already had announced with 12 projects so far, for the DCU's Legion of Doom to just be fully organized there and then with all of these members. No. But the biggest reason really is that the Legion of Doom does suit a more fleshed out superhero universe, which is ironic to say, as I always go on about and have gone on about in this video, with how this new DC universe is one where not only do heroes exist, but they have existed for a long time, but we still need it to exist for a bit longer, because all while we don't know too many specifics right now, I can imagine the Legion of Doom coming in, let's just say chapter 2, in where maybe David Corenswet's Superman has most certainly been established to be working with Batman and Diana and other League members for a hot minute. Long enough for other characters like Lex Luthor to be a ways into his disdain for Superman, and then go on to found the Legion of Doom, likewise for other villains and their own heroes and their overall plans to put an end to it all. Whereas right now, I can't deny that I can't say if David Corenswet's Superman has flown around with Batman and Wonder Woman. He might have with one or two of them, but I just can't imagine a whole fully fledged Justice League by the time Superman Legacy picks up. Now, other things I've got written down here for other members of the Legion of Doom, with Batman, of course. He's, let's just say, been going for 10 years. He's obviously probably at this point run into the Joker a few times, so Joker would likely be a member. But then there's just other things as well, like the exposition of all kinds of heroes to set up to some extent for the Legion members, from Gorilla Grodd potentially being a part of it. What about Sinestro? Sometime down the line, after seeing what's going on with Lanterns and the state of things there, maybe that could be addressed. What's going on with Diana? Would Cheetah be a member? I have no idea, but this is why it's so important to think of the Legion of Doom as maybe a threat that's built up to in order to be a chapter 2 threat that's organically gotten to that point rather than rushing to do it again, maybe even after Brainiac's initial appearance in DCU Chapter 1. Let's just say, for example, that did happen. He could come back and be Brainiac in the Legion of Doom, which, he has been a member as well. So you see where I'm going with this. It just ultimately, bottom line for me, seems to be a Chapter 2 threat that I would love to see, because all while you do need to do some things, and it's also feeling a bit ironic for me to say, because, I do think you organically need to set some of these villains up, but this is a universe in where heroes exist, so the Flash might already be out there and have the Reverse Flash already, so it could be quite natural for the Reverse Flash to be a member because he's already been chasing Barry for some time. Same with Gorilla Grodd, same with some other characters out there. It's just that's going to be a bit difficult for them to play with, because we are hitting the ground running where this universe has Superman already in the red cape. So what villains does David Corenswet's Clark already have? Has he run into Toyman already? Maybe not Bizarro, but maybe a couple. Not necessarily a fully fledged Lex Luthor, but Batman. Has he been up against the whole Rogues Gallery at this point? Will Scarecrow and the Riddler be a part of the Legion of Doom? It's just, yeah, it's going to be a bit of a headache, I think, making it all work in the best way possible. But if they do make it work, the Legion of Doom could be something that is cooked up to over a long time, prepared, cultivated, and when it finally hits the screen, it could be a really cool threat for the heroes at that point. Let's just say year 6, 7, or 8 in the DCU, David Corenswet Superman, the DCU Batman actor, whoever that's going to be, all of these characters to go up against them. That would be amazing. Okay, so for number 5, I actually really do kind of like this one quite a bit. So number 5 is Vandal Savage. So Vandal Savage is really quite an intriguing pick for me, as I feel like he's a fairly versatile threat, to the point of where it would actually be a really believable challenge to a lot of the DC heroes that we're going to meet. So after gaining this immortality from a meteor, if you will, he completely changed. He became insanely powerful, capable of regenerating from injuries extremely fast, even regenerating from death. So it kind of makes him virtually unkillable, which is, what makes him such a problem for the Justice League. But another aspect is, he goes long way back into history, and he's influenced a lot of it. He's smarter, more intellectual than your average dude out there. His senses are vastly heightened. He's got superhuman strength. Essentially, guys, he is a walking crazy threat to a lot of the DC heroes we know. So there'll be a lot of spectacle there, but I can imagine not only will you get a lot of entertaining action like that, he would be, a very calculated villain who's smart, all kinds of things that you'd want to see in a threat, rather than just, going face punch. You will get that, but also some other cool aspects to it as well. Now, popularity-wise, this could kind of be a thing. As I was mentioning a minute ago, a lot of DC fans mostly, I would say, know who Vandal Savage is, but will they want him over some of the other popular choices we've been over in this video and have still yet to go over, like Brainiac? But to me, that's almost a bit of a irrelevant factor in a way. Sure, there's more hype behind certain characters compared to others in a predictable sense. For example, Joker would be more hyped than, let's just say, the ventriloquist for a lot of people. But I really want the DCU to not only do hyped up heroes and villains, but also, and luckily this is what James Gunn has said, propel villains who could be extremely compelling on screen to make them something people are thankful for afterwards, if they decided to go that way and actually do them instead, if that makes sense. That's something that happens a lot. Sometimes people are like, I don't care about these characters in this movie, but then the movie comes out and then everyone is obsessed with that movie's characters. They were comic book characters, but maybe they didn't have the popularity until that thing happened. I think, I can't guarantee this, but for example, a lot of people are like meh with the Authority movie with James Gunn's lineup. Imagine what if that does insanely well. So a similar thing here with the overarching bad of the DCU, whether that's for both chapters, Vandal Savage maybe just for chapter 1, maybe just for chapter 2. A lot of people might not care for it, but if executed well, Vandal Savage could be propelled to some people's favorite villain. Now, as for a chapter villain, believe it or not, I think he works for both. The same with any villain I say for chapter 1. It's got to be built up to. That's the thing. The chapter 1 villain, let's just say the center, I wouldn't expect, even in the first 3 years of movies or TV shows in the DCU, to go full send into the center, or in this case, Vandal Savage. You might have, I'm not saying the cliche post-credit scene, but again, maybe Creature Commandos would initially establish Dinosaur Island, and maybe they wake it up. I don't know. Maybe there's subsequent weather reports in Superman Legacy, or there's just something going on. Maybe poor examples, but with Vandal Savage, there could be other things. Maybe he appears in one of the movies. Maybe he appears under the alias of another character, but then you realize that there's a bigger plan at play. But you don't really get into things until after The Brave and the Bold. But up next, here we have something that I felt like I couldn't not really include in the list. So number 6 is the Anti-Monitor. But the thing is, when I say that he's a realistic idea when it comes to thinking of big bads, I mean, I think we could automatically maybe put him in as a latter Chapter 2 big bad when entertaining the conversation of implementing him. If anything, since this villain entails a story in where there's practically a sense of a reboot, Crisis on Infinite Earths. But I don't think the DCU would be designed in such a way in where Gunn would plan to do, a Crisis on Infinite Earths-esque reboot even after Chapter 2 ends in 8 to 10 years after just only doing, a reboot. Now, I know that would be in 10 years' time from now, but I still, I could be wrong. Maybe after 2 chapters in the DCU, they might tackle the Anti-Monitor, do a Crisis-esque storyline. You still keep on David Corenswet as Superman post-Crisis and everything like that, and the reboot isn't as big as maybe some people think it would be, but I don't know. I can't imagine Crisis on Infinite Earths even after 8 to 10 years, but it's going to be funny clipping this for 8 to 10 years' time, just in case I'm wrong. I have to say that a live-action cinematic universe on the big screen of the Anti-Monitor with a fleshed-out DC universe of David Corenswet Superman having been on our cinema screen for around 10 years at this point by the time we see him, among whoever will be Batman to everyone else, would be absolutely mind-blowing if done correctly. But to step back again to what I was saying, I remember there were whispers of Walter Hamada wanting to do something like this before the whole regime change and before Gunn and Safran came in, which would have made somewhat sense to build up to, given how long that universe had been going and, what they, I guess, wanted to aspire to if they were going to carry on the DCEU as a kind of not a reboot with Crisis, but as we know, that never came to be. But now we've changed gears and they're getting a new universe anyway. So sorry, Anti-Monitor, but your threat of antimatter is way too strong, I would say, to acknowledge you too much at any point of the first 2 chapters of the DCU, at least for me. But I would love to know if you guys, any of you, disagree with that. So number 7, I kind of feel a similar way about this one, but again, when thinking of DCU Big Bads, Chapter 1, Chapter 2, how could I not put this character on the list? And that is Necron, or, getting into the Blackest Night territory. So, as amazing as this would be, to get into adapting the very embodiment of death and how Necron's influence just creates a bunch of Black Lanterns out of, heroes in the DCU. And I mean, you guys know what I mean if you've, delved into Blackest Night. I just don't think that is what we're going to get anytime soon either. Even, when I think of, towards the latter of Chapter 2, I mean, I guess it's possible because Batman's already 8 to 12 years in at this point, if you want to just put a rough ballpark there when we're picking up with Superman Legacy, and then, you fast forward 8 to 10 years on top of the timeline of Superman Legacy, Batman would have been around for quite a hot minute. So, and other heroes as well, like Hal Jordan, John Stewart, that we're, seeing in the Lantern series in the very infancy of the DCU. So again, 8 to 10 years on top of that. This is why you can argue that you could get into that in the latter of Chapter 2, but most certainly with Necron, it's more of a never say never thing for me, because I do think it would be incredible to get even nods to this in the early stages of the DCU, and I think that we even could. This is the really cool thing, and why, if you want to get into the more cosmic-y kind of crazy stuff of the DCU, and this is stuff that they can acknowledge, especially in a very fantastical DCU, and it has to do with Lantern's lore and whatnot. So, given that we're not only getting Guy Gardner and Superman Legacy, but we're also getting a whole Lantern show, which mostly centers around Hal Jordan and John Stewart, I can imagine the prophecy of, the Blackest Night being mentioned maybe in the show, which would be freaking awesome of an Easter egg. It's the kind of thing you could imagine me talking about in a breakdown of Lanterns Season 1, Episode 5. It doesn't guarantee it's going to happen, but it's cool-ass world building. As Gunn said in the announcement, in the Lantern show, they discover a terrifying mystery that ties into their larger story of the DCU, which I've always taken could whatever Hal Jordan and John Stewart stumble across be the first tease of whether it's the overarching big bad of both chapters or just Chapter 1, maybe, just maybe. And, they went on to say, and I quote here, "This plays a really big role in leading into the main story we are telling across film and TV. So that's overarching story across all of the projects of Chapter 1. I don't know if that would be the prophecy of Blackest Night and everything like that, and maybe that could be some of the villains we've mentioned. I've even speculated before, what if it's a drone of Brainiac sent to Earth long ago? Or what if it's something Vandal Savage related? I don't know. But to emphasize here, it doesn't mean that Necron couldn't be cooked up. Now, I've already said how there could be a reference to the prophecy of the Blackest Night in the Lantern show, but we could see other bigger things throughout the first 2 chapters of the DCU, and where maybe Necron tries one of his many attempts to gain entrance to the physical plane, which he has tried a number of times, but the rift gets sealed up again and he's forced to face freaking eternity in his own realm until, he tries again. Maybe that could even be addressed in the Lantern show and how Jordan and John Stewart cotton on to the rift somewhat opening. I don't know, but had to put Necron / the Blackest Night to some degree on this list, and a prelude to that story I can imagine being realistic and would be really cool to stumble across, but a fully fledged thing anytime soon, I just don't know. So for number 8, the final one kind of in this video would be Mongul. So good old Mongul, the very powerful galactic ruler and conqueror, and anyone who knows this villain knows where we could go with this threat. I think it would be so cool to see Mongul on screen, especially with, Warworld being used against Earth. That would require the Justice League. I mean, let's just say that's a Justice League level threat and beyond, if there ever was one, to defend against the tech involved. Again, it's just insanely powerful. And if you didn't know already, like Warworld, and the thing about Mongul is there's quite a few different iterations of the character ever since the 80s, I'd say. But Warworld is, described as this monstrous engine, this kind of mobile planet, if you will, more of a satellite of tech. It's really like a mobile Death Star, but even beyond that. I mean, it can destroy planets like the Death Star, but it's just, again, imagine like Death Star upgraded beyond to what even we saw in The Force Awakens times 1,000-fold, and then that arriving to Earth. So it really is the perfect galactic conquering tool for Mongul to use in his conquest. And given the incoming threat of Warworld as well, this could maybe lead to some spacefaring adventures, some really cool locations displayed in the DCU. And with the Warworld technology, Mongul could be in the market of, I guess this would be the somewhat plot of it, of conquering Earth. Perhaps he arrives to Earth wanting to create a new engine city as a part of the galactic conquest. But the only thing I would say here, and to me, again, this would be maybe more of a Chapter 2 villain. I guess it could be a Chapter 1 villain, very slowly cooked up against, and, heroes rally together to face Mongul and the threat of him conquering Earth and turning it into a new city engine. It's just, it does somewhat sound maybe like something we've kind of seen before, and it wouldn't be anything truly unique in terms of presenting a new big bad. The somewhat standard motivation just wouldn't really hold up an entire arc, in my opinion. Maybe I can see the vision. It just seems too formulaic for me. But maybe if, I'm not writing it here right now, and I don't have a whole, architectural team for the DCU right here, so I'm sure they could do something pretty interesting with what the character offers. But I don't really have too much more to say about Mongul other than that. I mean, I have been asked about him quite a lot whenever we're talking about speculation of the DCU on live streams, but it's just kind of a villain where I think people really want to see him on screen, but would there be comparisons to Thanos? And I'm not saying Thanos went around on a freaking Warworld mobile planet, if you will, but there are somewhat similarities there. It does really make me think in the DCU, I'm not saying there isn't going to be space stuff. We know there is. We know Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow requires them going out in space. But will the big bad, or one of the big bads, really be, and I guess the same can be said for Brainiac, will they be parking up right next to the planet, being like, paging Earth, I'm going to take you over? Is it going to be that straightforward? I don't know, and maybe I'm not giving it enough credit there, because on paper that sounds like a movie we've seen before since the 1950s or 60s, but if executed well, cooked up for long enough in the DCU, it could be something that, with a lot of heroes combining together to unite and take up the threat, it could be really, really kick-ass. But let me know what you think. I've got a couple of other villains here. This is really kind of like a list of 8 potential villains, but of course, one of them is Darkseid, but I've already kind of been over that. Then there's Perpetua, the mother of the Monitor, the Anti-Monitor, and, you know, well, this character is just insanely powerful, which is why it's more of an honorable mention. But for similar reasons, to get into just the hands of whom literally create the multiverses, if you will, even though it's something cosmic, I could almost imagine on the big screen, and it would be insane and really, really cool. This is just not only in another league, but a whole other dimension of what I'd imagine being at like bloody chapter 10 of like a 20-year long run in the DCU or something. So yeah, this character is insane, and, you know, if we ever do get into some crazy cosmic lore of the DCU, it would be cool to get a nod to her 3 sons and even herself, but the DCU has got to build up so much exposition and plenty of other things before we delve into anything just insane like that. Eclipso. I didn't really want to put Eclipso in the list of villains I can truly see for the DCU right now in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, because while I think he is a great character, he is similar to what I've shared some concerns about some other characters even in this list, with just how I have no idea how they would start off with him or even get into that in Chapter 2, with just how powerful Eclipso is. I guess you could nerf him quite a bit, but he really is on the cosmic level, given that he was meant to more or less be the embodiment of Wrath on the divine level, if you know what I mean, and even marks up to that of, you know, the Spectre in terms of what he is capable of. So I guess one thing I'm maybe failing to remember right now is in the DCU there might be some power scaling that would have to happen compared to the characters in the comics. That's just something that does happen because you guys know how powerful some of these comic book characters are, to the point of where if you do them in live action, you may still love the concept of the character, so you do it, but you might have to be like, okay, we're not going to go equip you with this level of power, if you know what I mean. So Eclipso should maybe be on the list. I would love to know what you think of that, because he definitely is a Justice League level threat. That's very appropriate there. So all in all, ladies and gentlemen, the DCU's first big bad, if you will, to me, seems like it could be a threat that isn't quite Anti-Monitor level, not Necron Blackest Night level, but perhaps more in the realms of an individual who could be cooked up to, and that individual that I'm referring to could still count as something like the Center. But other examples to me, as I briefly teased throughout this video, is like Vandal Savage, before we tackle anything and get too crazy with something likened to that of, I don't know, the realms of Blackest Night. Or, you know, it could be someone like Lex Luthor, in where, you know, yes, we already know Nicholas Hoult is Lex Luthor, but we could start with him, but then evolving more into this overarching Legion of Doom threat that is lasting over the years of the first or second chapter as the many projects unfold. That's more of the basis of kind of what I'm sensing right now, and I say I'm sensing as if I have some kind of freaking divine knowledge of what Gunn is planning to do. I really have no idea, but it just seems more reasonable to approach it that way. But I could be completely wrong. Maybe he's going to go head over heels into one of the other things that we've talked about on the list. That is everything, guys. I really enjoyed making this video. I know it was a long one, but I really wanted to get in depth on the possible big bads that we could see in the DCU. So if you got this far and if you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate a like. Definitely consider subscribing if you're brand new to this channel, or like maybe you think you're subscribed, but double check the subscribe button, because a lot of you tell me like, oh, I thought I was, but I just checked it and now I've hit the button. So maybe today is the day that I get you a subscription. But I'm going to love you and leave you now. So just thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you people of the DCU in the next video. Goodbye.